go. My name's Dan Jenkins. For those of you who haven't met me, I am the head of client services here at Wagada Digital. So I'm speaking to you from our, I'm actually speaking to you from Evesham, which is just north of the Cotswolds. And I head up our West of England office, our Cheltenham base, and also look after a team of account leads and specialists across both St Albans in Hertfordshire and Cheltenham as well. But what I'd like to do now is hand you over to Laura, who is our strategic marketing manager. Laura's going to intro herself, give you a bit of background about the company, and then kick off with our webinar on marketing strategy. Thanks, Laura.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for that, Dan. As Dan said, my name is Laura. I am strategic marketing manager at Wagada. Based in our Cheltenham office with all the scaffolding behind me. It's a lovely view. But yeah, I'm in the West of England office with Dan, and my kind of role and responsibility is helping clients kind of shape their marketing strategies and helping them push them forward, and basically achieve their goals that they do want. And we will go into how we structure those strategies and the types of things to include throughout this session. As much as we would love it to be, it's not all about Dan and I, and we have a really strong team. We are part of a fantastic team of digital marketing experts across both St Albans in Hertfordshire and across the West of England as well. And yeah, the team is made up of some really great kind of digital marketing specialists in particular, and really help kind of put those strategies in place. So as much as Dan and I would like it to be about us, it's about the wider team. So to kick off this kind of presentation and to kick off this session, we're going to have a look at what is a marketing strategy. I always find that it's good to make that definition straight off, so that we all know what we're talking about and where we're heading. So to start, basically, a clear marketing strategy is essential for your business success. It can define the long-term plan of how your products or services will achieve and maintain that competitive advantage. Establishing all of this up front basically allows you to align that organization around how you're going to reach your targets, explain the benefits to your audience, to your target customers, and then encourage them to actually make that purchase. Put simply, your marketing strategy is designed to basically promote your products and your services to help you make a profit, to help you make sales. And a good marketing strategy helps companies identify their best customers. So who is it that we actually want to be talking to? Who is it that we actually want to be selling to? We can then really get under the skin of those customers, so finding out sort of what they need, where their pain points are, how your products and how your services can help them with those and relieve those pain points. And with a good strategy, it's possible to implement the most effective marketing methods. So as part of that, we will start to kind of chat through some tactics and things that you put in place. But all in all, it's kind of making sure that we are basically, your whole business is aligned in kind of achieving those objectives that you do set. Choosing a model to follow whilst creating your marketing strategy will ensure that there's structure to it, and it will mean that you can assess your marketing plan and basically create that sort of data-driven strategy to achieve your goals. The model that we like to use here at Wagada is the Saucetac Model. So having a look through and this kind of diagram here kind of takes you through each of those stages, and this is what we will be chatting through with you today. So to start with, we always have a look at the kind of the situational analysis. So this is the where are we now? Moving through then to objectives. So where do we want to be? The strategy and the tactics is how we get there. What do we need to put in place? What channels do we need to be starting to look at? And then finally, that control, which is that bringing it all back to say, did we actually get there? Did we meet those goals? this approach allows us to kind of, like I said, kind of build out this strategic data-led approach to any of your marketing activity. And this can really underpin any of the activity that you're doing, anything that you put in place, but it means that you have that sort of that plan going forward, and you all know where you want to get to. These are different aspects that we'll kind of go through today. So we'll start to have a look at how you identify your target audience, how you position that brand and develop that key messaging to build into your kind of strategy and your tactics to help basically raise visibility of you and your brand, how to attract those customers, gather that data, and actually kind of move them right through to that sale. And then I think the most important part, which is usually some of the slightly forgotten part, is also making sure those customers then kind of become repeat customers, and making sure they become long-term customers as well, and kind of creating that brand advocacy throughout. So I think at this point it's really important to say that creating a marketing strategy does take time. It needs buy-in from many of the stakeholders within your company. And it will also kind of require their input to it. It can't sort of be done in a silo from straight from your marketing team, but to be able to kind of push through that success, the buy-in needs to be from that business as a whole. When it's done right, it will provide that direction for the business. So not only will it kind of help shape your marketing activity, but it can also sort of help shape basically what your brand is about, and make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of pushing those kind of aspects forward. As we all know, after the last couple of years, things can change very, very quickly, and the market that you operate in will probably look very different in 6 months' time, and probably looks very different than it did, especially 2 years ago. Therefore, your marketing strategy should be revisited sort of every 6 months or so to ensure that it's still applicable. Like I said, the world is changing ever so quickly, and we'll come on to measuring the success of your strategy towards the end of this session. But putting those clear goals in place is really vital for that, but regularly checking progress against those is also very, very important to make sure that we are moving in the right direction. So this shouldn't be sort of a one-off activity that you do once and then sort of never look at again and never revisit. It is a kind of continually moving feast, and something that should be added to over time. So if we start with the situation analysis, and kind of as promised, this webinar is about what to include, the sorts of aspects to start looking at, and basically sort of where to start with your marketing strategy. And the best place to start is having a look at where are we now. So being able to take that step back and be able to critically look at your business, establishing things like what you do well, perhaps the aspects that you don't currently do too well, what that marketplace looks like, how you fare in comparison to your competition, will basically give you that really good benchmark of where you are now, I guess that marketplace that you are operating in, and it basically will establish those benchmarks for you to help kind of build that strategy upon, and help you sort of move forward. So the sorts of aspects that we do look at this stage, we would always start with a SWOT analysis. So this helps identify those core strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. For that sort of fact-based analysis, it can bring some really fresh perspectives. We've gone through this for many of our clients before, and I think it always kind of throws up points that people may not have thought about before. It allows you to sort of have that kind of bird's eye view of both your internal capabilities, but also that external marketplace and where you sit within that. And it always does throw up some good sort of new ideas and things to base your kind of marketing activity, and especially in the digital space, to base your digital activity on. So having a look at these in a bit more detail, your strengths and weaknesses, At top, so these are your internal aspects. So these are the things that you do well, and that maybe you don't do so well. So strengths, for example, could be things like you have some very loyal customers, your USPs in your product and your service are kind of above and beyond. You have that strong team internally, so your salespeople, your training people are all kind of really, really strong. And it could also be that you have really strong kind of brand awareness. The weaknesses, for example, could be things like your internal processes or capabilities. It could be on the flip side of your strengths. It could be that your brand isn't well known in that industry, and that you have some quite strong competition, or that it's not well perceived. So there needs to be some work on that. But your strengths and weaknesses are your kind of internal aspects. A really good space to then move into is having a look at that external marketplace. And I think this is where possibly one of the things that is sometimes missed within that strategy is it's very much about kind of what we do and what we do and what our company is and how our company is made up, but actually starting to have a look at those external things. So having a look at the opportunities. So are there new markets? Are there possible new products that you're launching? Are there changes in the marketplace? I think we've all seen some incredible changes over the last 2 years about how people are working, if they're working from home, flexible working spaces. And I think the way that we kind of gather information, and the way that we kind of start reading and pulling in that information has changed massively. And I think that is both an opportunity, but also sometimes that can be a threat for some businesses. So I think it's making sure that you're having a look at your sort of external environment as well. And again, those threats could be looking at things like, are there new entrants to the market that are coming in very strong? Do you have some really strong competition? Are there possibly some new rules, regulations, and things that are coming in as well that could affect how successful you are and how your business does operate? So once we've kind of laid out all those kind of strengths and weaknesses, and again, I say it's a really kind of good exercise for you to go through internally as a business. And I think trying to get kind of quite a few people involved at this stage is always good. Your salespeople will have a very different approach and a very different kind of thoughts behind some of your strengths and weaknesses than possibly some of your internal team as well, or your marketing team. So I think it's always good to get a really kind of broad range of input at this stage, just to make sure that sort of you've got that really good kind of overview of where you're looking at and where you are now. The second stage of that is to start having a look at your competition. So at this stage, what we don't want to do is start copying competition, but it's always good to be very aware of what else is going on within your marketplace. So questions to ask are things like, what are their USPs? What services do they offer? How do their services, how do their products compare to yours? Well, how do their USPs compare to yours as well? So what are those unique selling points that maybe set them apart compared to the offering that you have? What do their key messaging points look like? So what do they sort of hang their hat on in terms of what they are pushing out to potential customers or clients? What are they shouting about? What are they talking about? Do they do much marketing? What channels are they using? And starting to really kind of build a picture of where they are, where they're based, and you can start to kind of get that understanding of what they're trying to achieve as well, and where they see they are moving to as well. In terms of choosing competition, I know there are some markets where you could probably have tens and tens of competitors. It's always good to narrow it down and I guess choose the ones that are most similar to you in terms of that product offering and those positioning. So if you are a local business, for example, then it's good to be aware of the national ones, but it's very unlikely that you'll kind of come up against those in terms of pitching for those customers as well. So we'd always say sort of have a look at sort of 4 to 5 competitors within this space and really kind of dig quite deeply into those. So have a look at things like the website, have a look at their social channels. If you can, sign up to their email communications and kind of really get under the skin of what they're doing and where they are positioning themselves within that marketplace. So the last couple of slides that I've gone through is that looking at where are we now, both in terms of your internal, but also within that marketplace. And the next stage of kind of moving through this this strategy is having a look at the objectives. These objectives we like to set very early within the strategy, and making sure that they then feed all the way through any decisions that you make, whether or not that's sort of marketing, product offering, and any aspects within your business as well. But it's always good to know basically the where do we want to be. So where do we want to make sure that we are getting through to, what are our main goals, where do we want to make sure that we are kind of ending up, and basically what is the point of this strategy in terms of getting us to the place that we do want to be. It's always good to set these, as I say, very early. These will always remain kind of front of mind for any strategic recommendations. All of the tactics and actions that we'll follow and we'll talk about in more detail slightly later on, these will all be based on these objectives. And one of the things that we really like to make sure that any objectives, we follow a SMART model. So the S in the SMART really stands for specific. So it's making sure those objectives are basically, they are to the point, they're not vague. Any unclear objectives are basically, they can leave your employees, they can leave you sort of uncertain of how to act. If you leave them very vague, then people aren't really going to know kind of how to get there, and sort of what that means, and those exact kind of aspects of where you want to be. It's really important for everybody within your company, not just your marketing team as well, but to make sure that everybody knows what that success looks like. The only way that everybody's going to know kind of if those objectives have been achieved is to make sure that they are measurable. So there's no point in sort of putting an objective in place that you can't actually tell whether or not you've hit it or not in 6 months' time. So they always need to make sure that they are measurable. You have that data to back it up, and you know, so that you can measure that success. There's no point in setting objectives that are completely unattainable and unachievable. It will mean that there is sort of, you'll lose that kind of momentum and lose that direction. So always making sure that you're basing them on some really kind of achievable goals will help kind of maintain that momentum throughout your implementation of this strategy. Obviously making sure they are relevant. So it's actually what you need to achieve. So is it that you need to increase sales? Is it that you need to increase your brand awareness? To making sure they're really relevant to you and your business, and on those kind of points of what you do want to achieve and where you want to be. And it's also that it's really important that these objectives have a target date or time frame for when they should be completed. So hence this kind of the last section in here is that time-bound aspect. So not only does this provide a sense of urgency, but when it helps to reviewing whether or not your strategy has been successful or not, then you can make sure that you've kind of got those time-bound aspects put in place. As I said, we would always recommend kind of reviewing your strategy as a whole every kind of 6 months to a kind of quarterly basis, but making sure that you are checking in on your objectives every month as well. And we'll come on to how we can measure those in slightly more detail a little bit later on, but making sure you know when you need to achieve these objectives by will really help. So I've got a couple of examples of how to put these in place. So an example of a non-SMART objectives is, for example, someone could say, we want to increase leads. We want an increase in leads. At this stage, there is nothing smart about that. And I think if you put that in one of your strategies and kind of moving forward and putting that as your objective, you will quite quickly sort of lose that momentum and push forward, because actually, what are we trying to increase? How are we measuring it? When do we want to achieve it by? So taking kind of that premise, but putting it into a SMART objective, we start to look at, say, increasing the number of website inquiry form completions from 5 inquiries per month to 10 by October 2022. So at this stage, we have your specific, so we definitely want an increase. We also have in here that it's measurable, so it's the number of website inquiry forms, so we can get that data from either the CMS or the analytics, and I'll come on to data sources in a little bit more detail slightly later on. But it's also attainable, so we're not saying that we want to go from 5 inquiries to 100. We're saying that actually we can see that there's that kind of increase, and then also we've got that it's relevant, so it's generating those inquiries and those leads for your business, but also it's time bound, so we know when we want to achieve these by, and when we are hoping that this strategy will be kind of in place and we can actually see those. So I know it's relatively early in the morning, and hopefully this will kind of wake you up a little bit, but I'm going to get you to do a little bit of work now. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and it'd be really good if you could write down 3 smart objectives for your business that you want to achieve in 2022. If you feel comfortable, if you can put them in the chat as well, but it'd be really good to just make sure that you've got that sort of smart aspect to them, making sure that they are sort of time bound as well, and you have those kind of smart aspects within that. So if I give you just a couple of minutes to do that, like I said, if you do feel comfortable to put them in the chat, that'd be really helpful. We can kind of have a look through some of them and chat through them. But if not, it'd be good just to kind of write those down and make sure that you're kicking off your strategy and you're kind of putting these in place. And hopefully Dan is going to be keeping an eye on the chat just in case anybody does.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat. Also, at any point, I should have said at the start, if anybody has any questions or they want to share anything but kind of anonymously, then it can be quite popular just to pop that question privately to either myself or to Laura, and then we can engage with it in the room, but without obviously mentioning specifics, or we can follow up about it afterwards. Yes, Laura, do you mind just going back to the example slide? There you go. Yeah, so anything like that, because often in these webinars it prompts great questions, but no problem, Lauren. It prompts really good questions, but you might not want to share them too openly, if you see what I mean. So I understand that as well. Also, if anybody has any questions up to this point, now would be a great time to pop them in the chat too. So if there is anything that's prompted any thoughts and you have a question or anything you wanted a bit of clarification on, don't hesitate to pop that in. Fab. So we've had one come in from Jenny. Thanks for sharing, Jenny. So increase website inquiries from an average of 35 to 55 per month, doubling incoming leads by the end of January 2022, and increase brand awareness by increasing LinkedIn followers from 5,000. That should probably, maybe that's
the other way around.
Oh, sorry, apologies, to 5,000 from 3,000 by the end of 22. Fab. Laura, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the aspects in there. So it's very specific in terms of why you want to do it as well. So it's really great to have that increasing brand awareness by increasing LinkedIn followers, for example. They should all be very easily measurable. Obviously, depending on sort of what you've got on your website in terms of making sure that we are tracking those leads. And it's, like I said, again, really good to have those kind of time-bound points on there as well. So making sure that you've got when you want to achieve those 4. So yeah, really, really good smart metric, that one. I'll just give you another minute or so. So if anybody else has any they would like to share, but thank you, Jenny, for sharing that one. That's yeah, really great.
I've just had one come through privately as well, but I'm more than happy to chat about that one on LinkedIn. That's absolutely fine. I'll share with Laura as well afterwards, and we can look at that one. So thank you for sharing that. And then improve brand perception of being competitively priced by the end of 2023. 70% of products, up from 55%. increase media presence by 30% with outreach strategy implementation by the end of 2024, and improve fulfillment from 3 days to next day. Okay, yeah, by the end of 2023. So these are really interesting. Laura, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, they're really interesting ones, and I think they kind of cover a number of different aspects throughout your business as well. I wonder if there's a little bit more you can add to those in terms of the specific nature. So just making sure that, for example, improving brand perception, making sure that you're sort of, you know how you're going to measure that, and what that kind of indication of success would be. But yeah, I think they are really interesting objectives for those ones. I think just maybe kind of just on that kind of specificness, just making sure that you have that, and you may have that internally as well as to how you're going to manage and kind of measure those. But yeah, really good and kind of strong ones. And I think having those timeframes on there as well. Timeframes don't always need to be sort of within a couple of months, and sometimes these look like quite big changes and kind of quite big objectives as well. So I think having those kind of longer timeframes on those ones.
So we've had a few questions. Thanks for that, Laura. We've had a few questions come through. There's one about LinkedIn, which is great. But perhaps we'll look at that one sort of at the end, because I just want to make sure that we're able to address a couple that are surrounding the SMART objectives. A really interesting one, and I think it's a really difficult one, and a couple of people have mentioned it actually. Tips on how you can measure an increase in brand awareness. Just very quickly, I'll hand that one over to you, Laura, but just from my side, the interesting thing about that is that often brand awareness you may not actually form a measurable SMART objective off that. What you might actually do is that the ultimate SMART objective might be to have more customers, to increase your customer base by X% over a 12-month period. Something like building brand awareness might fall more into the strategy, perhaps, of how you're actually going to achieve that. And perhaps the first step of doing that is to increase your brand awareness. But there are some really interesting things you can do, like social listening in on social media, and hashtags, and kind of Google sort of trends and things. Laura, do you have any thoughts on kind of brand awareness?
Yeah, I think with that one, you can probably break that down into a little bit more detail. So for example, increasing brand awareness, and again, as Dan said, that could be through social. So actually starting to be able to have a look at those metrics for how many times your posts are being seen. Are you kind of increasing that awareness? Are there more mentions of your brand across social, using social media as an example? So I think your kind of overarching objective might be to increase brand awareness, but to break that down into a few maybe slightly more manageable SMART objectives would be a really good way of making sure that we're achieving those, and kind of putting those throughout the strategy. But yeah, there are a number of different ways of having a look at that. And again, there are some kind of Google trends, looking at things like how many times your brand is searched for, having a look at sort of Google Search Console data, for example, to see if there's an increase in that kind of brand awareness and brand searching as well. I've seen a comment from Nicola as well. Yeah, brand awareness definitely measured by market share gain loss. So things like search metrics and the like. Search metrics is a really good kind of tool to use, and there are plenty of tools out there for kind of measuring the chatter around your brand as well, which will be part of that brand awareness.
Brilliant. Okay, fab. So what comes after objectives?
There we go. So let me kind of click through. So once we know where we are, I'm sorry if the lights keep turning on and off, by the way, and I keep going dark and light, but we have automatic lights in this office, so if I don't move, they turn off. So every now and again, it likes to light me up a little bit once I've moved around a little bit. So the next stage of this Saucetac model that we tend to follow in the strategy is, once we've had a look at sort of where we are now, where we want to get to, is basically starting to build up this strategy. And the strategy looks at how we're going to get there. So once we've set those objectives, how are we actually going to reach those, and then how are we actually going to keep the business kind of moving forward to kind of hit those within those timeframes as well. So a good marketing strategy is kind of split into 3 elements. So segmentation, targeting, positioning, which very much sounds like a lot of kind of marketing buzzwords in there. So put more simply, it's having a look at who, where and why. So who are we trying to target? Who are our customers? What do they look like? Where should we be speaking to them? So that will kind of pull into those tactics. And I know that somebody has already mentioned LinkedIn, which we'll come on to. So where should we actually be speaking to them? And also why? So why should those clients or prospective customers choose you over any of your competitors? What is it that you can offer? And what are those sort of key messaging points that we can pull through? So that kind of links back to those targeting and segmentation and positioning, but in a slightly more, I guess, kind of pulling that through into a more simple point of view. So we're going to go through each of those now. So starting to have a look at the who, which is one of the most important parts. And I think one part that can take quite a lot of time within that strategy is really looking at who are our target audience. Thinking about both your current customers, but also what your ideal customer might look like. And I think the stage at this stage, when we start to have a look into it, majority of people might start to have a look and sort of say, well, they usually have this job title, they work for this sort of company, and they're within this industry. But actually what we want to do at this stage is really dig down deeper into their makeup and thinking outside the box. So utilizing any data that you already have, for example, so things like your job titles and about their kind of work, especially in the B2B space as well. But also start thinking about things like their home life, their family makeup, where they absorb information. What does their day-to-day look like? So are they time poor? Do they have a lot of time to do a lot of research into the products or services that you're offering? And from this, you can start to build that picture of any current pain points, how you can meet those, but also the best channels and the best messaging points to kind of really reach those people and really make sure that we are kind of resonating with them. So I've put here a kind of list of questions, and obviously, as Dan said, all of this will be shared after this, but starting to have a look at their personal demographics, so things like their marital status, where do they live, things like, for example, one of the reasons to look into where do they live is do they have an hour-long commute where they're sitting on a train and might be flicking through their phone, at which case it's a really good time to sort of start hitting them with some of those marketing messages. Are they male, female, how old are they, which again we'll start to think about whether or not what devices they use, where they sort of start to see those information, things like their educational background, and then moving on to their work life. So who do they work for, job titles, what does their day-to-day look like, size of company, do they actually have that decision-making power? So the people that we're speaking to, in terms of those target audiences, can they make the final decision, or do they need to kind of go up a level to get that final sign-off? And in which case, how can we equip them with all the information they need to get that sign-off? How is their success managed? What are their biggest challenges? What do they face? And again, having a look at those pain points, but also then their buying behavior. So how do they purchase? And like I said, kind of what information do they need to be able to make that decision? So I'm going to make you all probably a little bit hungry now for a breakfast, but using McDonald's as an example is a really good way to kind of start to have a look at the fact that not everybody and companies don't have one target audience that you will just kind of, it's that blanket approach to everybody. So the McDonald's organized audience, for example, is far more varied than you would think. And I don't know if anybody's seen their most recent TV advert, but within 30 seconds, they target city workers, late night gamers, and also parents and busy parents as well. So within that kind of 30 seconds, and I'll come on to these in a little bit more detail, within those 30 seconds, you're starting to have a look at, they have a number of different audiences and a number of different targeting, of which we can then match those messaging points and those channels to, which we'll come on to kind of how we do that in a little bit more detail. So really narrowing down and segmenting your targets to it is individual groups. Like I said, you could have multiple different audiences, and these will all need to be marketed to in a different way. So this is kind of where we start off with creating this strategy, and why we always put this one kind of at the forefront of this strategy section, is that this will then kind of really shape where we want to get to and how we can talk to these people over the coming months and within your marketing. Once you've answered all of these questions, what's really good to create is create a persona. So actually kind of lay these out, actually write these up. These can then be shared throughout the business as well. So we know exactly, so everybody knows kind of who we're trying to target with these and how to speak to them. And it can really start to underpin every aspect of how your business does operate. So starting to put these in place, so look at those motivations. What does their personality look like? What are those pain points that we want to make sure that we are kind of hitting and make sure that we are solving for them. But yeah, like I said, it's a really good way of kind of making sure that everybody is on the same page with who we're trying to target and who we are, what they look like and what that makeup of their personality and their jobs look like as well. So once we've set those target markets, so we know who we want to target, and as I said, every target market is going to have slightly different messaging and slightly different tactics that they will need to be able to make kind of your strategy a success. So the next stage that we'd always move into is having a look at your tone of voice. So at this stage, it's how do you want to be perceived by those audiences, and what are the different kind of ways of kind of putting out your messaging points in there that will really sort of resonate with those audiences. So is it that they need a lot of support? Is it that they need kind of those educational pieces? But is it actually that they just need to know that you are experts within your area, you have very fast delivery, your kind of turnaround is very quick, and you're really kind of cost effective. So thinking back to once you've kind of laid out those different target audiences, each of them will need a slightly different kind of tone of voice to pull through. And again, this will underpin kind of everything that you do going forward. Once you have that tone of voice, you can then start to develop your key messaging points. So as I said, each target audience will have very different kind of key messages that will really resonate with them and help to push your product or your service forward. So if we work through that McDonald's example again, so the family with young kids who are on the road are going to want very different messaging points than maybe some others. So for example, they will make sure they'll want to know that they can get quick service. They have menu options for all the families. They have options for the kids, but they also have options for the parents as well to keep everybody satisfied. They'll need to know that it's affordable, but also there's some healthy options within there as well. So it's not all just going to be sort of chips and burgers as well. So there's some healthy options in there. And these are the kind of key points that would really resonate with them to make that kind of family makeup and that family persona kind of pull through and hopefully kind of purchase those McDonald's and make sure that we're kind of keeping those front of mind. On the other hand, you will also notice that one of the target audiences and personas that McDonald's are trying to target is the truckers, the people on the roads. They will want slightly different marketing, slightly different messaging points and slightly different marketing. So starting to think about the fact they'll need plenty of parking and space for them to actually kind of park up their vehicle. They're open any time of the day for any meals of the day. So whether or not they're looking for breakfast, for dinner, or kind of a late night snack at 1 o'clock in the morning, they'll need to know that McDonald's can kind of service all of that. They need some convenient locations. So obviously being on sides of motorways, making sure that it's kind of within their journey and it doesn't take too much out of their journey. It's not a diversion as well. And again, plenty of menu options. So if they're having this multiple times a week, they need to know that they can have something different. So that there's those kind of menu options as well. And then finally, one of the other personas that McDonald's are starting to target more and more, and definitely in their most recent advert as well, is that sort of city worker who's on a commute. And again, these would need very different messaging. So they might have that they can order on the app so that it's ready for whenever they get there. Again, they'll need fast service, they're on the move. One of the things that they really like to push to this persona is things like they have great coffee at really affordable prices. And again, those kind of convenient locations. So whether or not that's kind of just as they step off the tube or just as they kind of step off the bus as well, making sure that we are kind of matching those. So hopefully that example kind of really kind of starts to highlight how setting those personas and those target audiences right at the beginning of your strategy can really help you kind of lay out those messaging points, and kind of pulling through how each audience is going to be slightly different and have those slightly different information as well. So so we've kind of covered the who and the where and the why, sorry, and the next stage is to move into this where. So choosing a strategic framework will really help to shape the where in your strategy. So this helps add some structure to it, and any of sort of your digital marketing activity going forward in terms of choosing where and what channels that you do want to start to have a look into. One strategic framework that we like to use quite a lot is the RACE framework. And this will basically help provide us with the direction that we want our potential customers or clients to travel through. So for example, we want to reach those people who maybe don't know of us yet. And there are certain channels that we would choose to kind of have a look at that, and I'll come on to those in a bit more detail and also have a look at, then we want to move them through to kind of taking an action, converting, and then engaging, but also becoming those brand advocates as well. So we can map both those key messaging points and the tactics to utilize each stage of this framework. And like I said, it can really give that structure behind the where we actually want to be putting our marketing and our efforts in place as well. Which leads us really nicely onto those tactics and actions. So those tactics and actions, again, is the how are we going to get there? So how are we going to achieve our objectives? And this is where those individual channels will come into play. So there are multiple different channels that we would start to look at, whether or not that's Google search, whether or not that's blogs, PR, social media, whether or not it's through paid advertising, through emails, for example. There are plenty of different tactics that we can take through for kind of achieving those marketing goals and those successes. And I think it's always just making sure that once you kind of have your target audiences, your key messaging points, those tactics should come out of that quite nicely. So it's not that you will do all of these, it could be that you will choose them based on your the right kind of ways and the right places to match that audience. So interestingly as well, it's not a sort of a choosing one channel and doing that channel very well. So there's a recent study with HubSpot where they basically say that a usual customer takes on average around 8 touch points that they go through before they will make a before they will make a purchasing decision. So what we need to make sure is that we are matching the messaging that a potential customer might see throughout all of those touch points to help move them through that marketing framework, from kind of making that consideration points to moving them through to kind of that acting and kind of converting as well. So coming back to our McDonald's example. So for example, if we take the kind of city worker who's on the commute and is probably going to be looking for a breakfast. So on day one, they were sitting at home in their evening and they saw the McDonald's TV ad that showed that somebody kind of getting off the tube, ordering their breakfast on an ad straight on the app, and then being able to go and pick it up. That day, when they went into the office, they then had a colleague rave about the breakfast that they had that this morning. So that's looking at that sort of that kind of brand advocacy and making sure that you've got those reviews in there as well. They then, as they were walking home and kind of scrolling through Instagram, they saw an ad. So they saw an Instagram ad, again, that was kind of promoting McDonald's. So again, this is kind of our third touch point when we started to introduce kind of social media as well. From that, they then had a kind of a scroll through the McDonald's organic Instagram account and actually started following that account, and also liked a post about possibly an offer or the best way to kind of use that app to make sure that you're getting your breakfast pre-ordered. The following day, as they were waiting for the tube, they saw a billboard with an offer on it. So again, this is our kind of our fifth touch point in our different channel or tactic that we would start to implement. And this kind of helps kind of move through. So it's basically making sure that we're keeping the brand kind of always front of mind as well. And at this stage, they Googled breakfast near me. And the first thing that did actually come up was a McDonald's kind of Google ad in there as well, to say that there is one of their locations very close to where they are. So at this point is when they become a customer. So at this stage, they actually bought the McDonald's breakfast, and then they posted a story on their Instagram, and they tagged McDonald's in it using a hashtag that they saw in store. And then finally, that last point is they then received a discount code from McDonald's for sharing that experience on social, which means that they will become a repeat customer, and we can start to build that brand advocacy throughout as well. And I mean, this is, we would think that purchasing a breakfast is a relatively kind of straightforward path to a conversion as well. But what I wanted to do with this example is start to highlight all the different aspects of somebody and all the different digital marketing channels and tactics that somebody would need to put in place to help move them along that line, move them along that road to conversion. And like I said, it's not just kind of choosing one channel and kind of sticking with that. It's making sure you have that really good mix throughout as well. So really quickly, I'm very conscious of time. Maybe if in the chat as well, we can just kind of start to note down, and how many touch points can you think of that your customers might go through? So is it that they visit a website? Is it they could see one of your kind of social posts? Is it that they kind of start attending one of your events as well? So maybe to start having a think about what those touch points might look like, and the touch points that your customers might go through.
Thanks, Laura. Just two very quick, perhaps just to double up whilst you're doing that. We had a great question from Sam Schneider regarding how do you replace a sort of a financial and monetary discount with an alternative, but perhaps not money-based? It's a really interesting one because you don't want to devalue your product sometimes, and obviously if you're doing like crash pricing and you're taking kind of money off and like pushing sale, let's say you're a premium brand, doesn't really work. So even just introducing things like a percentage can be psychologically a bit more effective. So 5% or 10% rather than £30 or £40 off or whatever that looks like. And also I suppose the concept of added value. So rather than devaluing the product and discounting, kind of bringing added value to it with add-ons or extras or alternatives. Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think the add-on is a really good choice rather than sort of taking that kind of value out of it. I think as well, if there's anything that you can do to encourage people to kind of share their experience or kind of write that review as well. So that doesn't necessarily need to be kind of as a monetary based kind of incentive, but it could be that you can sort of say, we'll kind of feature you and kind of try to encourage those reviews as much as possible. And it doesn't always have to be for a monetary value. It could just be for that kudos as well.
Brilliant. And just very quickly, there was one earlier which kind of feeds in really to the tactics and actions about LinkedIn, and is it kind of a useful platform for any business? I think the interesting thing about that is that often we say it's a question of not, oh look, you're on LinkedIn or you're on Facebook. It's more, why aren't you on LinkedIn or why aren't you on Facebook? So often we'd say that really having that digital presence across all the channels, no matter what your business, is hugely valuable. But perhaps it's just about how much time you spend on those channels and what your objectives are and what you might get out of them. Would you agree with that, Laura?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this brings me very nicely onto my next slide, to be honest. So maybe we just kind of keep clicking through. I'm just quite conscious of
almost as if it was meant to be. Almost as if
I know,
almost as if we knew what was coming next.
I promised Dan didn't plan that question. So starting to kind of pull back and have a.
Sorry, Laura. Sorry, it just flopped.
I think you just
came off.
muted
You
me.
carry on. Yeah, I did. I meant to mute myself. You carry on.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So having a look at which channel should we use. So bringing this right back to everything that we've all spoken about throughout this session. So Choosing which channel to use, always start with where your audience are. So if your audience aren't on LinkedIn, then it's not the space for you to be in, and there's no point in kind of putting that effort in. But again, if they are people that use LinkedIn all day, every day, then again, it's a space where you just have to be. So have a think about where your audience are and where they start to absorb that information. Think about where your messaging points will resonate. So are your kind of sales messages going to look slightly out of place on certain channels, or actually are they going to kind of really work well? So think about where those points will actually kind of resonate and where they will be kind of best accepted. And also start to have a look at the capacity to manage. So actually making sure that internally you have the capacity to be able to have a look at all of the different channels and manage them well. I always say, and I will always say this to every client, is it's better to do a few tactics really, really well, putting the effort in where your target audience will be, rather than trying to spread your efforts too thin. And Dan and I have the conversation quite often of, should we be on every single social channel? Well, actually, if that is going to be that you're doing them kind of to the detriment of another one, just for the sake of being on that channel, then it's probably not the tactic for you. So making sure that you're doing them really, really well. And again, this could be that you start to introduce tactics over time. So you kind of, you nail those ones where you know your audience definitely is kind of straight away, before starting to launch into those other channels. So rather than kind of spreading your efforts too thin. The final part, which you'll be pleased to know, the final part of this strategy is the control. So this starts to have a look at, we've set those objectives, and have we actually hit them? So how do we make sure that we are looking at the right pieces of data, and how are we going to measure the success of this strategy? So if we go back to our objective that we spoke about right at the beginning, if we start to have pull this apart and have a look at the types of things that we would need to have a look at throughout this, and how we would actually measure the success of this. Obviously, we've said that it needs to be an increase, which means we need to know where we are now. So what are we getting in terms of that now? The number of sorts of website inquiry forms. So again, and I've got the next slide is having a look at the data sources that we can start to have a look at. But actually just making sure that we are monitoring how many form completions, for example, with this example, we're getting each month. And actually reporting on it regularly. So actually every month having a look at how many website form completions we're getting. And then you can start to kind of track that performance and track that, making sure that we are staying on track for that. So always kind of come back to those objectives, and making sure that you've got all of the points and all of the data sources in place to make sure that we're managing that. So data sources could include, and it's one of the main things about digital marketing that's really good and really effective, is how measurable it is. So starting to have a look at your CRM, having a look at things like the Google Suite, so analytics, search consoles, but actually having a look at the social platforms themselves, so Facebook, Twitter. There is a wealth of information out there and a wealth of data out there. It's just making sure that you are choosing the right ones that match your objectives, rather than trying to sort of have a look at absolutely everything. Conscious that it's 10:30, but that was all from me. I mean, there's been some really great questions throughout. Does anybody have any questions on any of that? And obviously, like Dan said, we will send all of this over, and we'll make sure that all of both of our kind of contact details are within that as well. So if you do have any questions at a later date, or want to chat through any more with us, then do reach out as well. But I was wondering if there are any more questions just to finish off.
Feel free to unmute. We'll give it a couple of seconds. Yeah. Fab. Brilliant. Okay, well, listen, thank you ever so much. There've been quite a few coming through on the private chat as well. So that's been really positive. And there's been some really great sort of contributions. And I feel like there's a lot to take away from the hour. So no, a lot of really, really happy people. Thank you so much for your comments. No problem at all, Leah and Claire. We're really, really glad to hear that. So glad you found it beneficial. What we'll be doing, as as Laura mentioned, we'll make sure that you get a copy of the deck. My colleague Bex will probably be in touch with a copy of the deck, and also you'll be able to get access to the video recording as well. We also, there's some lovely comments coming through here, so well done, Laura, and thank you for everybody for your contributions on that as well. Thought-provoking, it has even been said, which is something to take away. If anybody does feel comfortable as well, as we all know, businesses, SMEs, all of us benefit massively from kind of Google My Business reviews as well. So please don't hesitate to jump online, Google Wagada. We've got 2 Google My Business listings, one that is Wagada Snolvens and one that's Wagada West of England. Don't hesitate to drop us a little review, a little one-liner. It really does go a long way, and we would appreciate that if you felt so inclined. But otherwise, thank you ever so much from us both.
Yes,
and
thank
Laura,
you
to
very
close.
much for your time. Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and yeah, thank you so much for all the comments that are coming through as well. So I'm glad that you all found it interesting and insightful. So yeah, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your time. And we will follow up as well with any questions. But please do reach out if there's anything else that you want to discuss as a result of this.
Brilliant.
Great.
Thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, hang on, we got a question.
Oh, yeah.
Was there a question there? Yeah, we'll hold fire. We'll hang on. There's literally, I think a question's just come through. Is that right? From Claire. Yes, Claire, we are here. You got in just in time. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh. Claire, sorry, we can't hear you. You're off mute, but we can't hear you for some reason. No worries. We'll wait.
Okay.
Claire, if you were 2 seconds later with that one.
There you are. Can you talk? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. We can hear you.
Excellent. Sorry, I was on a different mic. I know, had it been 2 seconds later, I would have lost you. I just had a quick thought that might be useful for others, is if one were doing this, does it cost shed loads of money? Is it like almost impossible and unobtainable for folks that are starting out? And what's the follow-up that one would sort of think on financials to make this actually function?
And you mean in terms of, so do you mean in terms of building a tangible strategy, or going, right, well, when I'm going to do the strategy, actually executing it and the costs behind it from a marketing perspective? Yeah. Laura, did you want me to jump in, or do you want to go for it?
You go for it.
Yeah. So there's, okay, so there's sort of 2 questions there. So one is in terms of the cost to actually build sort of a market, like a large-scale marketing strategy. So, I mean, to give you an idea, so for us at Wagada, when we build out a large-scale strategy more like this, which is a tangible document of anywhere from around 40 to 50 sides, really, but is kind of an in-depth, the messaging, the approach, the tactics, how they all come together, and very much bespoke to the brand. That can come at an expense of the agency cost, which for us is, I think, around the kind of 2,900, sort of 3,000 mark to actually build that strategy. However, the interesting thing is that the long-term level of investment to then actually execute on any marketing strategy can be anything from minuscule to the sky's the limit. And what we've even done quite effectively recently, I mean, I was working with a brand only a few months ago whereby we built out a full marketing strategy at that level of kind of investment. But what it meant was that the entire strategy was very much with a focus of value for money, cost effective, or even free kind of marketing opportunities for the year ahead. And so actually, as a one-off investment, what that enabled them to do was go away with all those tools, then execute what I thought was is happening as we speak, a really, really effective kind of marketing strategy, given what it is that they're trying to achieve, what their goals are, because we need to be realistic about that as well. And if you're currently spending X and you want to increase, those smart objectives, if the goals are significant, then obviously that level of investment at times may need to be significant. And it also depends on the marketplace and the value to be competitive within that marketplace and what those tactics are. But the tactics and actions and the whole core elements of that strategy should really come off the basis of that intro, your SWOT analysis. And if in that SWOT analysis, you're really open and you go, do you know what? A weakness is that we've got limited financial resources. We're a startup. We've got X, Y, Z, and that's actually a bit of a weakness. but maybe a strength is that we are owner run with great time capacity, passionate resources. We believe we can do all of this. The whole point then is that the strategy can feed off that. Likewise, if a strength is that there's a high level of financial investment and a low level of resource, then the recommendations are to take different tactics. And so it does need to, each element of that strategy should feed into what comes next rather than it be looked at in isolation. Laura, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think like Dan said, it kind of is dependent on that business that we're looking at. I think one of the things that is always an output of these strategies is a huge list of action points. They can then be, I guess, prioritized with these are the things that we recommend that need to be done kind of ASAP. These are the things that could wait 3 months. These are the things that could sort of wait 6 months. And the level on which we can take on those actions will depend on that kind of level of spend throughout. So yeah, it varies completely. And I think once you've kind of worked through that, it always feels like a kind of quite a big kind of upfront cost, but it will literally give you the plan for the rest of that year. So yeah, and then you can kind of prioritize those actions kind of based on those objectives.
It's just and it's just about always staying realistic, isn't it? Because it's like it's so easy to do this with the sky's the limit, and you go, oh, we do this and we do that, but you sort of have to chat. Yeah, exactly. But you have to focus your attention in the right areas, otherwise you'll end up getting nothing off the ground, because you'll try and do everything and you won't get anything. Do you know what I mean? Rather than going, right, well, this is where we're at, and actually this is what we're going to do, but we're going to do it really, really well. And I think that's kind of the key. Does that answer your question?
It really answers my question, and actually makes it much less scary, I think, because I think it's really easy to think, yeah, but you're a digital agency, I can't, you're just going to be seriously expensive and then want loads more. And I think
word, I think, from memory.
I think it's quite helpful to know that you can do it realistically. You can say, oh, by the way, I need the advert.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Obviously, the adverts convert quicker.
Yeah. It's amazing as well, because what's a small budget to somebody is a massive budget to somebody else. You can't talk in that language. Somebody will turn around and go, oh, we've only got quite a small marketing budget, and then you realise the tens or even into the hundreds of thousands of pounds that is. Whereas obviously small to somebody else is literally, we need to make money before we spend on marketing. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, and likewise, what's a big budget? So it's it's just got to be what's right for you. Yeah.
And can I just weigh in?
Yeah.
I was just going to say that one thing we're looking at is return on investment. So spending money and making sure that you get something back, and you can't always do that without spending the money or giving yourself a time frame. So for us, we sell blinds, so it's quite an oversaturated market. So spending, it sounds like a lot, £100 a month on Facebook ads. But if we got 5 jobs from that and we got our money back, it's not necessarily making money or profit, but it's also getting our name out there. So
you're absolutely you're absolutely right. The other thing on that, I think they both are connected. Actually, it goes in line with Claire's sort of question, and also what you're saying there is that they tend to. It's a bit of a crude estimate, but there tends to be a rule of thumb which is pretty positive, which is something like 8 to 12% they recommend in terms of your turnover is kind of a marketing investment. So when you think about that, what's in the middle of 8 and 12, 10? So let's look at 10%. So if you were a micro business or a startup or a small business and you turned over £100,000 a year, for example, in your first or second year of trade or whatever, then that'd be looking at a £10,000 sort of investment. Whereas if you were turning over, and by that's all marketing, any marketing activity you might do, and sometimes it's difficult to take that leap, but it is about going like, what do we spend and what's the return on that? Likewise, then if you turn over $1 million or 2 million, again, it all, as I say, it scales up, doesn't it, in terms of what that looks like in terms of that level of investment. So it's very much a ballpark figure, but it's just something to think about sometimes when you're doing numbers, is to go, okay, well, look, what percentage, even if it's not the 8 to 12, or it could be more, it could be less, but what percentage do we realistically want to put into our marketing? And then you look at where you best spend that, if you see what I mean.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And really talk. Thank you.
Oh, good. No, absolute pleasure. Well, if anybody does have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Let us know. You'll be able to find us on LinkedIn. And as I say, you'll get all the details sent across as well.
Thank you.